The storm howled through the pines like a wolf too long alone. Jonas Reed stood over the stove, fire low, hands rough from the years and blackened with ash. Snow slammed against the log walls, each gust rattling the seams of the cabin he'd built himself, one broken timber at a time. He'd just poured his evening coffee, thick, bitter, boiled over once already, when the knock came. 3 sharp, desperate hits against the door. Not the wind. Not the trees. A human knock. He froze. No one had come to his cabin in 6 winters. He hadn't invited anyone in 10. Slowly, Jonas stood. He moved without hurry, not out of calm, but caution. He took the rifle from its nail and leveled it low before unlatching the heavy pine door. She stumbled in before he had a chance to speak. Barefoot. Naked. Hair wild with ice. A baby clutched to her chest, blue-lipped and quiet. Her skin was mottled red from cold, her lips cracked white. And still, she didn't say a word. She collapsed beside the hearth with a soft grunt, like a doe struck mid-run. The baby barely whimpered. Jonas stared at them for a beat, then shut the door behind her. She was already on her knees, bent low to keep the baby warm, trembling so hard he could hear her teeth. Her arms locked around the child like rope, not moving. Her eyes were vacant. Not pleading. Not afraid. Just empty. Jonas draped the wool blanket, the one he hadn't touched in years, around her shoulders. It swallowed her completely, like the mountain itself had opened and closed again. He poured his second mug of coffee, set it beside her, then went to stoke the fire. The logs hissed. Smoke curled up the flue-like breath. Heat crept into the cabin in slow layers, softening the air. She didn't drink. She didn't speak. He brought down a flannel shirt from the top shelf. His wife's old sewing lines were still visible along the seams. He laid it beside her. She didn't take it. Jonas sat in the rocking chair, one arm braced against the worn wooden armrest, the other on the rifle across his knees. His eyes never left the baby. The child had not cried once. His boots steamed beside the stove. The only sounds were the spit of wood burning and the soft wind pressing against the windows. Her feet, small and pale, left wet outlines on the wooden floor. Melted snow pooled beneath her toes. He should have sent her back out. Anyone else would have. He didn't know if she was trouble, or bait, or worse. But something in the way her fingers curled around the baby told him enough, she'd come this far on her own. And there was nothing but death behind her. She laid the baby in her lap and adjusted the blanket just enough to reveal a face, thin, cheeks hollow, skin the pale blue of near starvation. But breathing. Jonas's jaw tightened. The memory came uninvited. Another child. Smaller. Eyes closed. Wrapped in too thin cotton beneath snow-heavy earth under the cottonwood tree out back. He turned his gaze to the fire. The woman was shivering still. But her eyes were open now. Brown, like tree bark in winter. They flicked to him once, then down again. Still no words. She pulled the flannel shirt to her side and held it. Not to wear, just to hold. Like it meant something. Or reminded her of someone. Jonas didn't ask who. He stirred the fire again. The logs cracked loud, throwing sparks against the black iron belly of the stove. A sudden cough from the baby made Jonas flinch. He leaned forward instinctively, then stopped himself. He had no right. No place. She drew the baby closer. Jonas looked away. His hands found the rifle again, fingers brushing the oiled wood. He didn't check the chamber. He didn't need to. He'd kept it loaded for years. For bears. For worse things. He hadn't fired it since the night his daughter coughed blood. Outside, the wind shifted. Softer now. Like it had passed them by. Inside, the cabin smelled of wet wool, smoke, pine sap, and something else, new breath. A scent he hadn't known in too long. He watched as she slowly leaned back against the logs, curling around the infant. The firelight caught the edge of her cheek. Her lashes fluttered. Her lips parted, cracked, bleeding slightly, and her eyes drifted shut. He didn't move her. Didn't offer a cot. She was already on it. She had claimed the only softness in the place. And he didn't take it back. Instead, Jonas sat there, in his old rocking chair, the one that hadn't moved since the funeral. The one his wife used to sit in when the baby cried. It creaked now, as if remembering. He rocked once. And kept staring into the fire. The baby did not cry. But Jonas did not sleep that night. Morning came slow, filtered through a gray sky and the frost-laced cracks in the cabin glass. Jonas had not slept. He only sat there in the rocker, fire gone to embers, arms crossed against the ache that came with dawn. The woman stirred first, though she barely moved. Just the flicker of her eyes, half open beneath tangled lashes, staring into the wooden beams above her. She blinked once. Then again. As if not certain the roof was real. The baby lay bundled beside her, chest rising and falling in small, quiet breaths. She sat up slowly. One hand moved to the child's back. The other to the flannel shirt still clutched near her collarbone. She didn't speak. Not a word. Jonas didn't expect her to. He was already outside, chopping wood. By the time he came back in, she was on her feet. Shawl tight around her shoulders, one of the old ones, his wife's, still smelling faintly of smoke and pine. She'd wrapped it like armor. The baby was tied to her chest with one of Jonas's faded bandanas. She stood near the hearth like she didn't know where else to stand. Jonas handed her the cup of coffee. She took it without looking up. Later that day, without asking, she swept the ashes from the fire pit. Carefully. With the quiet reverence of someone used to cleaning someone else's home. She didn't ask what to keep and what to throw away. She knew instinctively. Her movements were practiced, slow, cautious, never wasteful. Jonas watched her from the table where he was repairing a broken latch. He didn't offer thanks. But he noticed when she winced lifting a bucket. He saw the bruises beneath her sleeve. She caught him looking once, and quickly pulled the fabric tighter. She wouldn't say her name. Wouldn't say the baby's, either. But she spoke softly to the child when she thought Jonas couldn't hear. Words that weren't English. Whispered lullabies in a melody that did not belong to this place. That night, when she sat near the fire to feed the child, Jonas looked away. Not from shame. But from memory. The shape of a woman with a child in her arms. That flickering image. The sound of a soft sigh, and a fire warming two hearts. He'd lived that once. It was gone now. The next morning, he found her outside. She was standing by the edge of the clearing, the baby in her arms, staring at the mountains. Her hair was wet, freshly combed, and she had braided it herself. The braids were loose but deliberate, like she was remembering how. He stood on the porch, leaning against the beam, arms folded. She didn't turn to him. But she said, quietly, "He traded me for 3 sacks of meal and a saddle." Jonas said nothing. He said I wasn't worth the mule. Her voice cracked. Not from emotion, just from too long of not using it. He stepped down, boots crunching on frostbitten grass. She didn't move as he walked past her and started stacking the woodpile. But her eyes followed him. That afternoon, she peeled potatoes without being asked. Then carrots. Then stirred the stew. She moved like she'd lived in other people's homes. Like she knew not to touch what wasn't hers. Like she knew to keep her sleeves pulled down. That evening, Jonas carried something from the attic. Dusty, wrapped in a tarp. He didn't explain what it was. Just set it on the porch and opened it. A cradle. Carved by hand, once beautiful, now worn. He sanded the edge quietly, as though it were any other task. She stepped outside with the baby on her hip and stood a few feet away, not speaking. Her eyes caught on the curve of the cradle, on the notch where initials had once been carved and later scraped away. She didn't ask whose it was. He didn't offer. But when she reached down and touched the edge, her fingers trembled. Jonas noticed she wore a silver ring, worn, too small, old. She twisted it often. Nervous habit. Maybe it was hers. Maybe it wasn't. He didn't ask. That night, when the baby cried softly for the first time, Jonas sat upright from his half-sleep. The sound was high and broken, a whimper more than a cry, but alive. He didn't go to them. But he didn't fall back asleep either. She walked the floor with the child against her chest, humming under her breath. The firelight turned her shawl gold. For a moment, she looked like a mother who'd never run, never suffered, never bled in silence. Jonas stared at the ceiling, hands behind his head, listening to the floorboards creak under her steps. In the quiet after, when the baby slept again, she tucked him into the cradle Jonas had set by the stove. She adjusted the blanket, then sat on the floor beside it. Her back to the fire. Knees drawn to her chest. Jonas lay still on his cot, watching her silhouette in the glow. Neither of them spoke. But in that hush, something cracked. Not loudly. Just enough to let warmth in. She didn't need his protection. Not yet. But she no longer flinched when he passed her the knife to cut potatoes. And for Jonas, that was enough. For now. The snow came thick and fast, like the mountain had decided to bury them both. By nightfall, the windows were already shuttered white, frost clinging to the inside panes. The wind moaned through the cracks in the logs like a voice too old to speak words. Inside, the fire spat gently, but it was the only thing left moving. The world had gone still, swallowed by cold. Jonas tightened the seal around the chimney and nailed boards over the front door. Just in case. Wolves moved in storms. Men did, too. Lena stayed near the fire, her shawl wrapped twice over now, the baby warm inside it. She didn't ask questions. Didn't offer help. But her eyes followed every move Jonas made, quietly weighing him. As if deciding something. By the second day, the food had been rationed. Only dry beans and the last of the salted venison remained. Jonas chewed in silence, elbows on the table, the cold creeping up through the floor despite the fire. Lena sat on the floor beside the cradle, rocking it gently with one foot. The baby, Noah, was fussing. For the first time since he'd arrived, he had the voice to cry. Lena hummed to soothe him. Not in English. Something older. Slower. Carried in from firelight and centuries past. Jonas didn't recognize the melody. But it sat deep in the cabin like it had always been there. She finally spoke near dusk. My name is Lena. Jonas looked up. He hadn't heard her voice in days. The words were rough in her throat, but clear. She reached down, adjusting the blanket around Noah, then added, he's not from the man who traded me. Noah, he came from a boy who tried to save me. Jonas set his mug down. He waited. He was Apache. Younger than me. Said I could stay with his grandmother's band. Said they had room. Said I didn't need to speak much to be safe. She swallowed. They killed him in the gulch. Shot him twice in the back. Said he was stealing livestock. Jonas looked at the fire. Did he? No. He was bringing me bread. Silence followed, long and thick. Then Jonas said, I buried my daughter 2 winters ago. Beneath the cottonwood behind the barn. She was 6. Lena blinked. But didn't ask. Fever took her in 3 days, he continued. Too fast. I was out hunting the first day. Never forgave myself for that. Lena turned her gaze toward the window. Snow tapped soft against the glass. She was born in this cabin, he added. Same cradle. Same floorboards. The fire snapped loud. Neither of them moved. Outside, the wind began to change. Jonas felt it in his gut, the kind of change that brought teeth with it. He reached for the rifle without a word. What is it? Lena asked, voice low. Wolves. She stood quickly, pulling Noah close. He unlatched the door just enough to look out. Snow came in sideways, thick and biting. But tracks were there. Half formed in the white. Circling. I'll be quick. Don't, Lena said sharply. He looked back. Her hand was clenched around the edge of the cradle. I've lived through worse, he said. That's what every man says before he doesn't come back. Jonas didn't argue. He just lifted the rifle to his shoulder and stepped out. The door closed behind him with a deep wooden thud. Lena stood there for several minutes, staring at it. She didn't rock the cradle. Didn't sing. Just stood still, one hand braced on the wood, the other holding Noah to her chest. The wind howled louder now. Minutes passed. Then more. Then the rifle, one crack, then two, rang out across the white. Lena flinched. Jonas didn't return for nearly an hour. When he did, the snow followed him inside like ghosts. His shoulders were dusted in white. His hands were raw. A long, red smear trailed from the cuff of his coat down to his wrist, not his blood. He set the rifle down by the door. Slumped against the wall. Breathing heavy. She moved to him quickly, helped peel off the coat. Beneath it, his arms shook, not from pain, but from something else. Not quite fear. Not quite memory. Something in between. I didn't kill it, he muttered. Just scared it off. He held out a bloodied scrap of fur. It got too close to the shed. Lena took it and tossed it into the fire. Then, slowly, she reached for the wool cloth they'd used as a changing pad and pressed it against his wrist. Her hands were steady. Careful. Not shy. He watched her fingers move. I thought you wouldn't come back, she said, barely a whisper. Jonas said nothing. The fire crackled low. Their faces lit orange by it. She moved to sit beside him, not quite touching, but closer than before. The baby stirred in her arms. She looked down and smiled. Jonas reached into the coat pocket, then held something out. A small wooden carving, rough, but recognizable. A wolf. He set it gently beside the cradle. It was my daughter's, he said. She liked to pretend it guarded her when I wasn't home. Lena's lips parted, not for words, but surprise. It still can, he added. She nodded once. The firelight caught the shine in her eyes. She didn't wipe it away. The cradle creaked gently. The baby shifted. For the first time, the rocking chair began to move, not from wind, not from ghosts, but from Lena's slow hand. Rocking. Steady. Certain. And Jonas, sitting on the floor beside her, let it. By the third day of silence, the snow began to loosen its grip. Drips echoed from the roof, slow and cold, falling into the metal basin just outside the window. The stove hissed with damp wood. The baby coughed, just once, but it broke something in the stillness. Lena was rocking him gently, his head tucked beneath the same shawl Jonas hadn't looked at in years. It used to belong to Martha. He could still remember the way she folded it, twice over, left shoulder first. Lena had no way of knowing that. But she did it the same. That was when Lena spoke, low and curious. Was it hers? The shawl. Jonas didn't answer. She kept her eyes on the baby. Your wife. He stood abruptly. Don't. She stopped rocking. The knife he'd been whittling with clattered onto the table. He grabbed his coat and walked out into the barn, slamming the door harder than necessary. The wind had eased, but inside him, something hadn't. Lena sat still. Only the baby's shallow breath moved now. In the barn, Jonas buried his hands in the grain sack. Not feeding animals. Just grounding himself. The smell of hay and leather should have helped. It didn't. He stayed out long enough to let the silence mend its crack. But inside the cabin, something else was breaking. A sharp cry rang out. Then another. Not the baby, Lena. Jonas. He was running before he even knew it. The barn door slammed open behind him. He burst into the cabin, nearly slipping on wet stone. Lena was by the cradle, eyes wide. The baby's skin was hot. Too hot. He won't nurse, she said, breathless. He's burning. I don't know what to do. Jonas moved without speaking. He knelt beside the baby, brushing Noah's forehead with the back of his hand. Then his palm. Then his wrist. He sniffed the baby's breath. Checked his tongue. Lena watched, stunned. Jonas stood, walked to the cabinet, and pulled down a jar of dried willow bark. Crushed it. Dropped it into a kettle. Filled the kettle with snowmelt from the pot. How do you know what to? He didn't answer right away. Just lit the stove and placed the kettle on it. Then, softly, because I didn't know last time. I waited too long. My daughter went quiet the night before. I thought she was resting. By the time I got to town. He trailed off. Lena looked down. I had a horse, he added, bitter. But it was cold. I waited for daylight. Thought it could wait. Silence. I never forgave myself for that kind of waiting. Lena didn't speak for a long while. Then, just above a whisper, I tried to drown myself once. The river behind the trading post. It was spring. I thought it'd be quiet, fast. Jonas looked over. But he cried. Noah. Just once. She shrugged weakly. That one cry. I don't know. I couldn't do it. Jonas stirred the kettle. The smell of bark and old medicine filled the room. That was the first time I realized he was stronger than me. Later that night, after the baby's fever began to break, they both sat at the table. Lena crushed more bark to keep for the next storm. Jonas sharpened his knife in long, smooth strokes. The room was dim. Only firelight and a single candle lit the grain of the wood around them. Lena reached across the table, not far, just far enough, and placed her hand lightly on his. He froze. Her fingers rested on the back of his scarred knuckles, the ones torn years ago when he'd punched through a barn wall after Martha's funeral. He didn't pull away. She didn't speak. Outside, the snow was soft again. Melting. Inside, the blade glinted, not menacing, but ritual. Just a tool. Like the silence between them. Sharpened. Honed. Not meant to harm. They sat like that until the candle burned low, neither of them flinching again. Not once. The last of the snow slipped off the roof one morning with a soft thud. It was the sound of winter giving up. Jonas heard it and didn't move. He just watched from the porch, knife in one hand, cedar slat in the other. The steps had begun to rot. Spring had come late, but it came, like everything else in these parts, after enough silence had been paid. Lena stood behind him, arms crossed, her hair tied back with a strip of worn leather. He glanced at her briefly. That was how Martha used to tie hers when she worked the goats. Not the same woman. but the same shape of resilience. I can help, Lena said. Jonas handed her the hammer without a word. She knelt and drove nails with the baby strapped to her back, silent and blinking beneath the afternoon sun. Noah had started cooing, not full laughter, just the small, startled sounds of discovery. Even that was something. Jonas leaned back on the porch post and wiped sweat from his brow. He's louder now. Means he's healing, she said, not turning. Maybe both of you. She stopped hammering. Her shoulders rose, then slowly fell. By evening, the front steps were repaired. Jonas lit the stove, and the two of them sat near it, passing a single tin mug back and forth. Coffee so strong it bit the tongue. The baby crawled across the rough floorboards, one hand always testing the edge of balance. When Jonas laughed, low and brief, barely more than a breath, it startled even him. Lena looked up. Didn't know you could laugh, she said. Didn't know I remembered how. She leaned forward, elbows on knees. What kind of man are you, Jonas? He stared into the fire, the flame flickering in the green of his eyes. The kind that's done a lot of wrong. The kind that didn't ride fast enough. The kind that looked the other way when someone cried. Lena held his gaze. Then we match. Silence. Not awkward, just full. The baby fell asleep between them, a little fist curled around a wood shaving. The fire popped. Outside, somewhere, a bird returned to the pines. Jonas spoke first. I trimmed my beard this morning. Lena smiled. I noticed. I hadn't in 6 years, maybe. She nodded, eyes soft. You still kept a mirror. He gave a one-shoulder shrug. Didn't mean I looked. Later that night, Lena took her bundle, a few folded things, a hand-stitched diaper, the baby wrapped in wool, and placed it gently into the old cradle. Jonas was already standing near it, hands in his pockets. The cradle had been Martha's last gift. She carved the legs herself. It hadn't rocked in years. Until now. The baby shifted, sighed, and settled again. Lena smoothed the wool and stood beside Jonas. They didn't speak. The firelight painted her skin gold. His scarred hands twitched once, then stilled. In the back room, the old wedding dress hung untouched, a relic, yellowed and folded over a rope line. Lena had found it once. She never asked about it. She never would. Outside, spring rustled through the branches. Sap bled from the cedar where Jonas had cut it. Earth pushed back at the soles of their feet. The cabin didn't feel haunted anymore. Not healed. But not hollow. Jonas looked at her one last time before turning down the wick of the lantern. You don't have to leave, he said. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The thaw came quickly that year. Sunlight lingered longer over the pines, and birds returned in pairs. The ground had softened, and green things were beginning to test the air. Jonas knelt by the grave beneath the cottonwood tree, a simple stone, unmarked except for the way he always cleared the snow from it. That morning, he left a single braid of wild grass on the mound. Not a prayer. Just a sign that someone still remembered. He was returning to the cabin when he heard the horses. Dust. Saddle creak. 6 of them, rough men with skin leathered by cruelty more than weather. One of them dismounted first, stockier, meaner, with a limp in his left leg and eyes that landed on Lena like she was a thing owed. Told you she'd be here, the man said. Ran off with my boy. My property. Jonas stepped onto the porch. He said nothing. Just reached inside the doorframe and brought out the old rifle. Lena appeared behind him, the baby held tight against her chest. She didn't cower. Her feet were bare. Her hands didn't shake. She was mine, the man snarled. I fed her, clothed her, gave her my home. You can't just keep her. Jonas's voice was quiet. She's not yours. The man took one step forward. Jonas didn't raise the rifle, not yet. But when the man reached for Lena, lunging up the porch steps with that wild, broken look in his eye, the gun fired. It was a clean shot, low and direct. The man collapsed, howling, his thigh bleeding into the spring mud. The others didn't move. Not out of fear, but because they'd seen enough to know what kind of line had been crossed. One helped the wounded man up. Another tipped his hat without expression. They turned, rode off. The dust hadn't even settled before Jonas walked back inside, leaned the rifle against the wall, and sat down by the fire. No one spoke for hours. That night, Lena packed a bundle. She wrapped the baby, collected the bark medicine, the wool shawl, and the silver ring she never took off. She saddled the mare Jonas had helped her tame weeks ago. He stood beside her, silent. When she cinched the last strap, she turned. You want us to go? Jonas didn't meet her eyes. No. She waited. But I'd never ask you to stay, he added, voice lower now. No man should ask that. Not after everything. Lena looked at him. Not through him. At him. She walked to the saddle. Uncinched the pack. Pulled out each item. Slowly. One by one. The baby. The shawl. The ring. Then she turned, walked back inside, and placed it all back where it had been. The next morning, the porch smelled of fresh wood again. Lena was sewing a curtain, not because it needed fixing, but because she could. Jonas was in the rocking chair, the baby sleeping on his chest, one tiny hand curled around the button of his flannel shirt. Outside, the grave beneath the cottonwood no longer felt alone. Inside, the fire was steady. Quiet. No words were needed now. Not yet. But spring had begun.